The one thing I want to highlight here is Jadah had the opportunity, I think, to stay in comfort zone or go outside of comfort zone, to take on a lot, learn unfamiliar things, or not do that. And I think she really took the leap into something that was challenging and something that she thought maybe was outside her comfort zone, but she did an outstanding job with it. Her communication about her project before she defined an idea, during the project, with her committee, and her patience and willingness to learn all showed, I think, a really first-rate temperament that impressed me. And working with her this summer as one of our TAs for the upcoming class of 29 or 30 students coming in next year. So Connor and Jadah, you better be on the ball. We're gonna have a good time. We got a big group, but Jadah, really amazing student and really kind person. And I ignored her restaurant tip that she gave me, and I ended up going to a restaurant that was owned by, I think, somebody she didn't really like that much when I visited her hometown. So I'm sorry about that, Jadah, or for anything else I've done to you over the last year. But your project is called Documenting the Impacts of Climate Change Through a Community-Guided Coastal Heritage Study, Building Resilience and Addressing Gaps in Heritage Protection. Jadah.
Thank you, Corey. Hello, everyone. As Corey mentioned, my name is Jadah, and I am going to talk to you about documenting the impacts of climate change through a community-based coastal heritage survey, building resilience and addressing gaps in heritage protection. So just for a pre-presentation overview, we'll begin with background and motivation, then move on to project overview and methods, then results, and then finally discussion and next steps. Beginning with background and motivation. So the rapid increase of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions over the past century or so has perturbed our planet's climatic balance beyond the scope and severity ever really endured by humans in the past. And as a result, extreme weather events, tropical storms, storm surges, rising sea levels are all widely understood to be experiencing changes in frequency and intensity in ways that that hinder our ability to comfortably exist in the ways that we have in the past and the ways that we do currently. These impacts of climate change threaten our coastlines and its many resources through processes such as erosion, flooding, inundation, storm damage. And as around 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the coastline, a substantial portion of the world's population is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and resource loss. As demonstrated here, nearly 31 million people live within 2 kilometers of only the world's most vulnerable coastal areas, depicted here in red. And this affinity for living by the coast is a trend that extends back in time thousands of years, as shown here by population density with the darker colors. Coastal areas have long been utilized by humans to support livelihoods, and as such, the archaeological record in coastal areas contains deep time histories of past flora, fauna, and human activity, including interactions between natural and social environments through time and how humans have balanced these systems. Considering this, coastlines serve as a sort of archive of human history in these areas and are therefore of paramount importance to the survival of modern populations. Therefore, as a vital and shared resource threatened by climate change, coastal cultural heritage, its vulnerability, and its protection is what I decided to focus on for my project and what I'm going to be talking to you all about today. So first, we'll start off with what is cultural heritage. So cultural heritage, the tangible and intangible expression of culture, encompasses physical sites, objects, traditions, as well as knowledge, practices, and techniques. As such, protection of heritage resources is crucial for all societies, mediating the transfer of knowledge through time and serving as points of connection to places given meaning as well as identities of meaning. Further, in the wake of stressful stimuli or disempowerment, cultural heritage functions as a source of resilience through its role as a central entity in the collective history of societies, facilitating and supporting cultural identity, community solidarity, and as a shared locality. Despite this, the vulnerability of cultural heritage, especially coastal cultural heritage, is growing. In this context, vulnerability refers to social vulnerability, which is a framework to examine how susceptibility to loss or damage is shaped by social and environmental factors. Thus, in considering this, in addition to high exposure of these sites to erosion and storm damage and flooding, this vulnerability is also exacerbated by a lack of updated community-informed data sets, as well as a lack of publicly available mechanisms for addressing this vulnerability. And we will now review each of these in turn. So the quote on the screen originates from a paper by Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo, one of my advisors and esteemed researcher in the field. And this paper, as well as many others, have identified that in many coastal areas, the impacts of climate change are damaging coastlines and their sites with a frequency that is often not able to be accurately reflected in climate data sets without more real-time feedback. So with incomplete data sets that are not up to date, the damage that is actually imposed upon these populations and coastlines and sites of cultural heritage can be a lot worse than what is predicted by climate models. And if this deficit is left unaccounted for, then the appropriate mitigation and protective measures may not be taken, which can then lead to excess damages. Further, this work done by Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo further corroborated research indicating that any actions taken to address the potential vulnerability of cultural heritage that do not include the collaboration of local perspectives are less likely to be successful in providing sustained and effective support to these communities, and are also a lot less efficient at directing often limited funds. So pictured here are all of the largest pieces of legislation that have historically been responsible for cultural heritage in the United States. However, these documents only really deal with tangible cultural heritage, such as historic buildings and sites and like monuments, and they also actually really very seldom mention the term cultural heritage in these texts. Therefore, these acts and their subsequent agencies still show really large gaps in research and coordination regarding protection of cultural heritage and protection from impacts of climate change. Regionally, this is an especially prevalent problem. The largest deficit in community-led cultural heritage programs and data collection in the United States is considered to be on the West Coast, as opposed to the programs that are available for the East Coast and in the Southern region. While one or two stewardship programs are available in the West, none of them really provide all of the key and ideal components, including community-guided formats, capability of providing real-time data, and monitoring of prehistoric and historic sites, therefore leaving a need for such a framework to address all of these components. So moving on to project overview and methods. So my project then seeks to address all the issues that I have laid out thus far by providing a framework for the protection of cultural heritage. So the components of this framework include creating a second updated version of the community-guided coastal heritage form for the collection of data, as well as testing this form in multiple locations in San Diego via pedestrian land survey in order to determine the potential for implementability in California as the basis for a community monitoring program. So just to briefly state the intended benefits of this project, tying everything together, this collection of data allows for updated data sets which offer the ability to measure climate impacts as they occur, supporting more accurate climate modeling, as well as better informing policy regarding protection. The collection of this data also strengthens community resilience and capacity for adaptation through empowered cultural identities and through community cohesion. And lastly, the preservation of archaeological material can further offer insight into paleoclimate conditions and interactions between natural and social environments through time, and how humans have balanced these systems, and understanding how these varied interactions have informed human knowledge and practices can then help us better navigate our current climate crisis. So starting off with some of the methods, the community-guided cultural heritage form is a digital survey for the collection of data pertaining to site information, observed cultural heritage, as well as prioritization of site intervention. So this data is obtained through multiple sections of assessments, prompts, and questions for the user to input responses. And this can be text responses as well as media responses such as pictures. So the first version of this form was created by my committee chair, Eric Rodriguez Delgado, with protocol developed by Dr. Isabel Rivera Coyazzo. And so what I did for my project was basically develop a second updated version of this form with modifications that I hypothesize would improve usability for the audience as well as efficiency and depth of data collection. So just to briefly touch on some of the main modifications that I made to the survey. So acknowledgements of the importance of leaving site material, not taking any, as well as not sharing any photos online of site material were added. An assessment of damage section was added, which is shown here. And then visual aids, guidelines, and Spanish translation were all also added for increased accessibility. And lastly, the ability to submit multiple forms for one larger site was added to this form as well. And all of these provide the ability to collect more robust and high-resolution data. So testing in San Diego area was done in partnership with California State Parks and was carried out via pedestrian land survey in 3 locations: Cardiff State Beach, San Alejo State Beach, and Silver Strand State Beach. The motivations for choosing these sites are related to their deep connections to cultural heritage, such as the existence of at least 30 archaeological sites among these 3 locations, including a historic shipwreck that has had pieces recently surfacing in Cardiff. The motivations for choosing these locations were also guided by the abundance of contemporary human relationships with these environments, as well as personal discussions with stakeholders, such as the Viejas of the Kumeyaay, who indicated that these areas are of cultural significance. And this form was also tested in the Dominican Republic at the site of La Isabela by one of my advisors. However, for the purposes of this project and this presentation, we're just going to focus on the results from San Diego. So now we will briefly review the results, and then after we will delve further into them during the discussion section. So starting with Cardiff and San Alejo State Beaches. So on this side here, we have Cardiff State Beach, and over there we have San Alejo State Beach. And these were taken on the day of inspection. On the day of inspection, we went during low tide, and we started at the northern end of Cardiff State Beach, headed south, and then we surveyed about a quarter of San Alejo State Beach, starting at the southern end, heading north. So these were the points that were recorded during the Cardiff survey. The image on the left was recorded to document active erosion of the coastal cliffside. And as Cardiff contains multiple publicly listed archaeological sites, and as this particular area of erosion was below a residence, the damage here and the erosion here was recorded as damage to a cultural heritage related site. And then the other point recorded during the Cardiff survey was another point of erosion of the cliff, although this was on the northern end of the beach. So next, for the San Alejo portion of the investigation, one piece of material was found, which was a broken off piece of a modern day floating dock. And though modern in origin, this material is related to the effects of climate change on cultural heritage. Damage to piers in the San Diego area have been occurring a lot more frequently recently. For instance, the closure of the Ocean Beach Fishing Pier in October 2023, which has been a disappointment to the community that relies on the pier for livelihoods. And so now moving on to Silver Strand State Beach. So for Silver Strand State Beach, the points taken with the Coastal Heritage Form along the coastline included 2 pieces of material, both of which were modern, but regardless provide insight into the threats to the prehistoric and historic sites recorded in the area. The first point taken is of a rope from a ship that was washed ashore and then beached far away from the waterline near dunes that separate the walkable beach from the road. And so the next point was the crest rail of a chair that was embedded within one of these dunes that is also in that area between the walkable beach and the road. And this area was actually enclosed off for a sanctuary for the snowy plover bird. And so the location of these two items recorded, in addition to the amount of debris and trash that were observed on the beach, were indicative of the fact that these sites and this coastline may be experiencing changes in wave energy, which would be threatening these sites. If debris is reaching the dunes where valued habitats and potential archaeological material lie, then there is a potential for damage from this wave action, endangering the wildlife and potentially washing away archaeological sites forever. Now moving on to the discussion and next steps. So the results of these walkover surveys were useful in gaining insights into modern human relationships with the coastline, in addition to the climate-related impacts currently threatening the value ascribed to these survey locations through past and present human-environment interactions. Early on in the survey, note was taken of all of the activities that were occurring on these beaches, leisurely activities, people walking, exercising, as well as livelihood activities, fishing, and tide pooling. And because the continuous exchange between people and place is a core part of the definition of heritage, it is therefore important for the accurate collection of data regarding the prioritization of location and the sites. The signs of erosion in Cardiff and the broken off floating dock piece found in San Alejo and the debris in Silver Strand all provide evidence of the climate change related threats to cultural heritage in these locations, demonstrating the need for a framework to address these threats, as well as getting a better understanding of the kind of threats that a framework would need to address. And these observations also provide an understanding of how I can better, perhaps, streamline this survey for San Diego County purposes. And then for next steps, I am continuing to work with California State Parks and Recreation to potentially develop the foundation into an official cultural heritage protection program. Recently, permitting was approved to continue work in this area and developing this project and testing in this area. So I will be continuing to do that with State Parks and Recreation soon. And then lessons learned throughout this project have helped me shape the ideas for this program as well, such as including a monitor education program, as well as a certification process for those that participate in the program. The experience of developing the project thus far has also reinforced my understandings of a need for such a framework to help document the frequent damage to the coastal heritage sites, as well as to help with the departments that are currently in charge of cultural heritage that have smaller workforces. Further, moving forward with California State Parks and the approval of official permitting will allow for continued discussion and collaboration with stakeholders, enabling me to fine-tune this form and the monitoring program to best serve the cultural heritage and communities of San Diego. My committee members, and then just a big thank you to them for all of their help, especially my chair. I could not have done this without your immense help. And a thank you to CSP leadership, as well as my amazing cohort. Yeah.
Hi, Jadah. Great job on your presentation. I wanted to ask you, in terms of the impact of developing a heritage monitoring program, how does that look in comparison to the rest of the states? And where do you see this impact happening most in terms of like developing policy in California?
So in comparison to the rest of the states, so there are monitoring programs, for instance, FPAN, the Florida Public Archaeology Network's survey program does an amazing job, and actually parts of my assessment were modeled off of that. So it would look more similar to the more developed versions of the programs that are available in other regions, and that's part of the deficit issue that we face here. And fitting into policy, I see it being able to kind of better inform decisions as far as funding and as far as having the appropriate kind of measures to be dealing with this that we don't currently have. As I believe you quoted, and also the Scripps Center for Marine Archaeology, states like Alabama have better protection programs than California does. So there's a lot of space for that. Thank you.